And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather is showing a front here pushing across the Aleutians, bringing rain into the Alaska Peninsula, and a trough up along the North Gulf Coast, keeping it wet here in that area. Areas of snow along this Arctic boundary here from the eastern Arctic coast southwestward there across a portion of the Seward Peninsula from the Kobuk-Koyukuk Valley right on down into the northern Bering Sea. And another storm coming up will mostly pass by into Canada, mostly energy, but some rain will hit the southern coast as that passes by late tonight and early tomorrow. And by tomorrow afternoon, that storm's really weakening in Canada. Showers over the northern panhandle, still kind of wet here over the North Gulf Coast, but not too heavy on the precipitation. And mostly along the coastline there, dry to the across the southern interior. And snow continues here with the winter storm warnings, weather advisories out here for the Yukon Delta and northeastward, all the way to the eastern Arctic coast. And the strong winds continue with a high wind warning for St. Lawrence Island. Low pressure, rain, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, in toward Kodiak Island, and again spreading into the southern Kenai Peninsula and Cook Inlet. And then for the day on Wednesday, still a chance of showers for Kodiak Island, the Kenai Peninsula area. Light rain continues from Prince William Sound eastward. Big storm here coming up into the southeastern Gulf of Alaska. So look for high wind watches again out for the Sitka area and the southern panhandle associated with that front for possible gusts of 60 miles per hour. And a weak low here, keeping it wet and unsettled over the Alaska Peninsula. Cold air coming southward here pushes snow all the way down to Adak and Atka with mixed precipitation in toward the eastern Aleutians. And for the coastal water forecast here for the south coast, south to southeast winds at 20 knots for the day on Tuesday. Central coast south at 20, and the north coast, that's where the winds will be the strongest, out of the east at 25 to 35 knots. And for the Lynn Canal area, north at 15, northeast 15 here for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait southeast 15 knots. And then as that storm approaches during the day Wednesday in the afternoon, we've got good gales here on the south coast, south to southeast, increasing to 45 knots with seas building 25 to 30 feet. Southeast winds picking up to 40 knots for Clarence Strait. Central northern interchannel southeast at 25. And the north coast here, east-southeast, 30 to 35 knots. North Gulf Coast tomorrow, south to southeasterlies at 20 to 25 knots. Prince William Sound, southeast at about 20. Variable winds, Cook Inlet, 15 knots. East 25 for Kamishak Bay, southeast 30 for the Barrens. And for Cook Inlet on Wednesday, as well as Kamishak Bay, northeast winds at 20 knots. Northeast 15 for the Barren Islands. Northeast 25 with 6-foot seas for Prince William Sound. Western North Gulf Coast, northeast at about 20, but some gales here on the eastern North Gulf Coast for 35-knot winds out of the east. And for Kodiak Island, east to southeast winds tomorrow at 30 knots. And small craft advisories for the Alaska Peninsula for east and northeast winds, 25 to 30 knots, and east at 30 knots for Bristol Bay. And for the day Wednesday, excuse me, west to northwesterlies at 15 to 20 knots there for the Alaska Peninsula, and winds out of the southeast at 20 for Bristol Bay. Variable winds are on Kodiak Island, 10 to 15 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, we've got north to northeast to northwest winds at 15 to 25 knots. Variable to northeast, 20 to 25 knots for Adak and Atka. And a good northeast wind out over the western Aleutians, anywhere from 30 to 40 knots, strongest west of Kiska Island. And then for the day on Wednesday, north winds at 30 to 35 knots here from Adak and Atka all the way out to Shemya. And for the eastern Aleutians, about the same, north to northwest winds at 25 to 30 knots. And for the southwest coast, for tomorrow, north to northeast, 25 to 30 knots. Northeast at 40 knots for St. Matthew Island. 30-knot winds there for the Pribilofs. And St. Lawrence Island looking at north winds at 30 knots, while Norton Sound, not much different, north of 25. North winds 30 knots for Norton Sound on Wednesday with gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island. Yukon Delta coast, north at 35 knots, north 40 knots. St. Matthew Island, north at 35 there for the Pribilofs. And up to the north there, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, we've got east-northeasterlies at 20 to 30 knots. Lighter winds for the central coast, out of the northeast at 15, north 15 on the western coast, and the Chukchi Sea, stronger north winds at 30 to 40 knots. And then those drop back some on Wednesday for the Chukchi Sea, north 20 to 35 knots. And lighter winds north at 10 knots, western central Arctic coast, light variable winds for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast.